After I was going to say a crazy week in British politics, but it's only Wednesday. So, after a crazy 2.5 days in British politics, we are logging on for an emergency podcast. I'm Laura Gordon. I'm the Liberal Democrat candidate in Sheffield Hallam. I'm joined by two of our regulars, Sam Al-Haldani. Hello, Sam.
Hello,
And
welcome.
Alison Bennett. Hello,
Hi,
Alison.
Laura. Hello.
And welcome to the Lib Dem Podcast. So, guys, crazy times. We've had an MP manhandled through the lobbies. We've had the chief whip resigning mid-vote. We've had the Prime Minister failing to vote on her own confidence motion. We've had one of the shortest Home Secretaries on record. And that's just today. What did I miss?
Probably quite a lot, because with all that going on, that's just the things that we've managed to pick up in what's been going on tonight. The amount of news, I think it's like they're trying to destroy the phrase that a week is a long time in politics. Somebody set out to kind of go, how condensed can we get this? It's terrifying, and it's ludicrous, and I want to laugh, but that's the wrong reaction, because this is so desperate. You know, we keep on saying this is the first time that something like this has happened, but too much, the like of this has not been seen before. We have never had a government that has collapsed but carried on in this way.
Yeah, and I think, what did we miss? Well, I think when I was eating my breakfast this morning, the thing that the news was talking about was how Truss would fare at PMQs at lunchtime, but we've forgotten about that, because since then the Conservative whips have decided, or been told, they've got to have a 3-line whip on this Labour Opposition Day motion on fracking, and it would basically be a vote of confidence in the Conservative government. Suella Braverman, as you say, has resigned, or was she? I think she was sacked in the end, wasn't she, as Home Secretary? In theory, because she sent an email from a personal email account with attachments with sensitive government information on it. But her resignation letter sort of tells another tale, a little bit like she kind of wanted to be sacked. And then I had my tea at 7:30, eating enchiladas with the kids, and I looked at my phone when we finished the meal, and suddenly there's kind of open jostling and fighting in the lobbies in Parliament. Just incredible. And still, at the time of recording, so it's 9:10 now on Wednesday evening, it's not actually clear what's happened, whether it was a confidence vote or not. And yeah, as you say, whether Truss even managed to vote for herself in her own confidence vote, which is kind of an act of gross incompetence in itself.
Yeah, so when we were preparing for this episode, and believe it or not, listeners, we do sometimes prepare, we agreed to keep the part on what was happening brief, because we thought that by the time this has come out in a few short hours, it might already be a little bit out of date. But it would be good to sort of focus very briefly on the sort of the issue that this confidence vote was about, namely the Conservative government's attempt to end the ban on fracking, which, I mean, of all of the things to pick as your confidence issue, I mean, feels like a crazy one. I mean, have you had any sort of conversations about that with sort of, in your local parties, on doorsteps? Because I think you both live in areas that are sort of potentially affected, don't you?
Yeah, so I do. So I'm in Mid Sussex, and Mid Sussex constituency has 45% of the constituency under licence for oil and gas exploration. Just outside the constituency, but in the district, we've got the village of Balcombe, which you may or may not remember is where Caroline Lucas got herself arrested, sort of probably about a decade ago now, over sort of attempts to frack in the area. So yeah, the last few weeks, note for Lib Dem campaigners out there, HQ have produced a load of good information on fracking and data and drop-in articles and things that you can use. We've got a national petition going. So there's lots of resources that the party have provided that you can use. So as well as using that, I've been talking to the frack-free groups here in West Sussex about that in the last few weeks. And my colleagues on West Sussex County Council tabled a motion last Friday reaffirming the County Council's opposition to oil and gas exploration. And county councils are currently the planning authority on fracking. And they reaffirmed their commitment that they want that decision to be kept local at the county level. And that motion gained unanimous support, and it's a Conservative controlled council. So all the Conservative county councillors in West Sussex, voted with the Lib Dem motion that they want to keep the status on fracking as it is. What about you, Sam?
Well, it's in Oldham itself. It's not a sort of issue that's really gained a lot of traction, but it's still, we've got a motion coming to one of the parish councils, so it's still getting some. And I think the thing that even in Oldham, where it's not been a headline issue, it's still clearly an issue where those kind of soft Tory voters, it's quite a turnkey issue for them. It's something where when you're talking to people on the doorsteps, but it's an environmental issue where there's kickback for the Conservatives for thinking about ending this. Because what you get a lot of the sort of, especially in the rural areas, you get a lot of that Tory vote, which is kind of, certainly I wouldn't call them necessarily environmentalists, but certainly keen on that preservation of the countryside environmental thing. And it just, I mean, Laura said, why would you choose this? It doesn't make any sense to pick as a vote something that's going to alienate a key section of your voters.
I mean, I think it's going to alienate almost everyone apart from Jacob Rees-Mogg, isn't it? I mean, who actually wants this? Like, apart from a tiny number of people who probably mostly have shares in fracking companies. I mean, and it won't even help with the energy crisis, because even if we fracked everywhere we could frack, it wouldn't give us any energy for the next decade. I mean, when renewables are sitting right there, I mean, it's absolutely mad. I mean, one of the sort of little sidebars of hilarity in today's story, I mean, you kind of have to laugh sometimes, otherwise you'd cry. And I think there have been some pretty classic excuses, I think, for why they're voting for fracking. Various different MPs have been coming out with. So that's been quite entertaining. I think you had quite a good one, didn't you, Alison? Your MP, something about the roads.
Yeah, so my MP, who is the Treasury Minister, Andrew Griffith, he's tweeted that he supports the government's position, but he doesn't support fracking in West Sussex because of the impact on West Sussex's dangerous roads. And it rather begs the question, who is responsible for the roads? Possibly the government, and possibly Conservative-controlled West Sussex County Council. But no, the only reason you wouldn't want to frack here is because of the road network, not because of the climate crisis or the waste or the impact on water or anything else.
I don't know, I'm convinced.
Hello, John from the Lib Dem Podcast here. We are delighted to say that this episode is sponsored by Prater Rains. Now more than ever, you need a professional-looking online presence and website. Prater Rains have been helping Liberal Democrat campaigns succeed for 18 years. Their Lib Dem Foci package combines a website, social media and email system to help Lib Dems win. You'll receive great support from real people, fair pricing and a huge range of features to choose from. Prater Rains are already the bespoke developers for Lighthouse, Lib Dem Draw Online and the LD Directory. They combine a talented system design with an unrivaled understanding of our party, our data and our systems. To find out more, check out the Prater Rains website at praterrains.co.uk/liberal-democrats.
I guess it's worth thinking a little bit about sort of how we got here. Obviously, there's the sort of Liz Truss, Conservative leadership election. I mean, but I think for me, I just kind of wanted to highlight as well the sort of absolute democratic outrage of how we've ended up in this position, where they're sort of part of the reason why this was, obviously this was sort of controversial among Liberal Democrats and other opposition parties because they oppose fracking for lots of sensible environmental reasons. But it was also unpopular amongst Conservative MPs because they'd just been elected a couple of years ago on a manifesto which said that they wouldn't do fracking. And it is absolutely democratically outrageous that you can be elected on a manifesto. Nothing, nothing particularly will change on that issue, and then you can just do the opposite, and we're supposed to accept that that's fine. I mean, it's just appalling.
Yeah, and you're basically, the government's putting its own MPs in a horrible situation of going, we want you to vote against a key manifesto pledge in order to say you've got confidence in us. Like, what kind of person?
And by the way, I suspect your local Liberal Democrats and your local Labour Party will be putting this on a leaflet as you speak, as you walk through those lobbies. I mean, it's just absolutely mental. But I mean, it is also, I mean, genuinely outrageous. And I think for me, it has highlighted as well how we, need to be thinking about issues like voting reform, because fundamentally, part of the reason that this government has been, able to just turn on a sixpence like they have is because, they have this 80-seat majority. They didn't get a majority of the vote, but they have an 80-seat majority, and that means that they can do whatever they like for the next, for that 5-year period, and no one can do very much about it. So here we are. I think thinking about where we go, what happens next. I mean, do any of you have any thoughts? I mean, the Lib Dems have correctly, in my view, called for a general election. It seems like the only sustainable outcome to this crisis. But I don't know. I mean, Sam, do you have any sort of thoughts on whether we're likely to get that general election or where it's likely to go from here?
I mean, in any sane world, if you were in charge of the Conservative Party right now, you would not call a general election from a tactical point of view because you'd lose it. But it's been quite interesting seeing some of the backbenchers coming out finally and saying, this is not what I want. This is not my, Conservative MPs coming out and saying, this is not my government. This is not what I'm here for. Because I think what our political system has relied on in the absence of a coherent political system is a kind of sense of public service and a sense of morality and decency, which has essentially disappeared from the Conservative government over the last 7 years. It's been government without morals. And some of them have finally started saying, I'm not prepared to accept this. And it'll be interesting to see if finally enough of them turn on the government and say, yeah, actually, I'm here for the public. I'm not just here for the pay packet and the job. And it's a horrible thing to say that they're just there for the pay packet. I really resent it when people say politicians are in it for the money, because we're all Liberal Democrats. We know we're not in this for the money because there's a lot easier ways to get money if you're a Liberal Democrat. But I can't.
Although, if people do want to support our Patreon for this podcast, you can do so by clicking on the show notes, which, it does not a huge amount of money, but does pay for the expenses of at least running the podcast and occasionally some small treats. Sorry, Sam.
That's okay. I mean, I genuinely, I'd be quite intrigued. I've heard rumours a little bit over the last few days that there are Conservatives who are thinking of defecting, and yes, you should be thinking of defecting. You should have a shred of morality and you should walk out of this government and have nothing to do with them. And you should back a general election because every single promise that you made, you've abandoned.
I mean, and arguably, they were always going to be abandoned because, the whole point of the 2019 manifesto, and I think this does show sort of how badly we've been let down by an entire political media ecosystem. The Conservative 2019 manifesto was inherently contradictory throughout. And I mean, it was held together by a slogan, and then it was held together by 2 years because there was the COVID pandemic, which gave them a function. But then we've basically been drifting since then, haven't we?
Yeah, and I think there is a growing sense within the Conservative Party, maybe amongst the activists rather than the MPs, that going out of government at the next general election is inevitable, is unavoidable. And actually, all the party's fit for at the moment is a period in opposition, to get their act together, put the house in order, work out what they're about and rebuild, in the manner that they were in 97, really, where the wheels had kind of come off. But what was happening in the mid-90s feels minor compared to the absolute chaos that we're in the middle of now. The vibes I'm getting from the Conservative councillors I know they're incredibly sad, they're angry, and sort of feeling slightly hopeless about where they go next, really.
I mean, so Alison, just in terms of the sort of the people you're speaking to in the party, because obviously I'm campaigning up in Sheffield where we don't really have very many Conservatives, so this is not necessarily my area of expertise. But I mean, can the Conservative Party even survive this, or are they heading for a split? I mean, looking at the Jeremy Hunt relatively moderate wing apparently taking over the party, while Suella Braverman is leaving the cabinet and resigning, and as you said earlier, sort of presumably for political reasons rather than because of this sort of slightly strange excuse about an email. I mean, is the Conservative Party heading for a split?
I don't think so, because I think what unites them is their sort of strong sense of the other, and by the other I mean, us, the Labour Party, maybe, I forgot what we're called. What are we? The Anti-Growth Coalition. Yes, That's what we're called.
Wokarati, tofu eating wokarati.
Yeah, that's it. So last week in council, I was accused of being somebody who reads the letters page of The Guardian, which is like, if that's the worst thing I've ever done in my life, I'll probably take that.
Does The Guardian have a letters page?
I don't know. I don't read it, but there we go.
Hey, it's the only time I've ever been published in The Guardian was on the letters page.
Okay, fair. Okay, I take it back. Obviously, I will start reading it.
But I think what they'll rally around is this fear of Labour, a Labour government sort of propped up by the Lib Dems and the SNP. I think that's all they've got left. But this wasn't something that was said to me, but it was something that was said to a colleague of mine in the last week or so, was that they just said, and here's a sort of campaigning note for Lib Dems, just make sure, this Conservative council said, make sure you've got decent candidates at the next local elections, because kind of we think we're on our way out. And please just don't stand paper candidates who are hopeless. Please stand decent candidates who can do the job. That was the level of desperation and hopelessness I think some of them are feeling.
I mean, that feels like a excellent segue. Thank you, Alison, into, the sort of campaigning segment, which I think is probably what, as a podcast, we're really here for, isn't it? It's sort of advice and support to Liberal Democrat campaigners. I mean, first things first, I think, Sam, I think you're right that the Conservatives are unlikely to want to call a general election. They should. Are they going to? Well, maybe not on purpose, but I think there's a pretty real risk at this point that the whole thing could collapse and we could end up with a general election very, very soon, potentially this year, potentially in December. I think a lot of us who lived through 2019 and all of those cold nights were hoping we would never see another December election, but here we might be again. What will you be doing to sort of prepare for a possible December general election?
Well, as we were preparing, I can't remember who it was. Somebody was joking that we should be actually preparing our leaflets rather than recording this podcast, and I don't think that's the worst advice in the world. Regardless of whether there's a general election or not, the level of chaos and heading into local elections next year, even if it doesn't end up being a general election, the Conservatives should be badly damaged at the local elections. So use this as an opportunity, and if you're purely sort of like operating on the local level, just use this, because it's such an opportunity, because everywhere is affected by this in terms of fracking. Similarly, the government was appealing to local councils to let them build on areas of outstanding national beauty. The level at which they have just ripped into the country is insane. And so you need to just sort of narrow down your focus, I think. So I talked before about the Tory vote who is wanting to move away, and there is a large part of that vote who are not that interested in voting Labour. And that's where our opportunity is. And so it's focusing in on those key messages about sort of protecting the countryside, competence, and decency as well. Those kind of things that will really appeal to a Conservative vote who is looking to move. and get out there and, you know, do all the obvious things, canvas, leaflet, just anything you can do to put that message in front of people, and be dignified about it. I mean, we've seen in what's happened in Parliament today a lack of dignity, and I think the way we convey that message, as much as what that message is, and being dignified about it, is a really important thing, because it'll remind those Conservative voters that there are decent people out there who are trying to do this to make things better.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. And, you know, what is unfolding in Parliament today, I just find deeply dispiriting. I mean, yeah, people can tweet about it and think, oh, isn't this ridiculous? But it's an awful way to conduct your politics. And I think it's having a terrible impact on the public and their perception of politicians and what politics is about. And I've had this real sense for the last week or so that the country's really broken. It's really broken in the sense that of standing up for what people want. You know, people have really been battered over the last 7 years with Brexit, with COVID, with the cost of living crisis, and their resilience to say, actually, we've had enough of this lot. We want to get rid of them. We want to oppose fracking. You know, we want benefits to rise within line with inflation, or whatever it is. People are too stretched at the moment to have that kind of will at the moment. And I think our responsibility is to be out there and talking to people and saying, actually, there is an option here in your locality and your vote is worth something and you can vote for us.
I think as well, I mean, I think it's also important to say, because obviously I'm campaigning in a Labour facing area, that, you know, it is sometimes harder when sort of Labour are doing well in the polls and when the Conservatives are there's a sort of national mood of wanting to kind of move away from the Conservatives. But I mean, my feeling on the doors, I've spoken to quite a lot of voters this week. I spent quite a lot of time door knocking. You know, it just doesn't feel like a mass surge to Labour. It definitely feels like people are fed up with the government as opposed to they're moving to Labour. And that does, I think, create a certain amount of space for the Liberal Democrats to kind of get in and talk to people and sort of say, well, actually, you know, in areas where it is between the Lib Dems and Labour, people actually might prefer the Liberal Democrats. But it is, you know, it's about having those conversations and about having the kind of sort of making sure that we don't give up on that either. Because, I mean, the fact is that, you know, it's a crisis of our entire political system. And I think one of the things that we have seen is how badly we need a strong third option, how badly we need a strong centre ground party, because ultimately part of the reasons why the Conservatives have been able to get so extreme over the last few years is, you know, because they haven't had that, you know, there hasn't been that safety valve, there hasn't been that pressure, there hasn't been that third option for those voters. So they've been able to take for granted everyone who's never going to vote Labour. And in a way, the sort of self-indulgence of Labour during the Corbyn years was the other side of the same coin. I mean, we have been badly served by our politics over the last 7 years, and we need a strong Liberal Democrat Party to sort of set that right. And that is going to mean campaigning in Labour facing areas as well as Tory facing areas. And I think, you know, that including at the local level where people may want to be sending a message to the government, you know, it might be harder sometimes. But I have to say, I'm not picking up on the doorstep, you know, a mass love for Labour. You know, I had people tonight telling me that they voted Labour in 2019 and they're planning to vote Liberal Democrat next time because they're unimpressed with the Labour Party. So I think, you know, it's not just about the Conservative Party. It's mostly about the Conservative Party this time. But actually, I think there's a wider crisis in our institutions, in our entire democratic setup, whether it's politics, whether it's the media. And, you know, we all need to be sort of getting together, and we all need to be doing what we can in our areas to try and rebuild liberalism, rebuild that centre ground, and hopefully start to set it right. I think. Sorry, I got myself distracted a little bit. I mean, we were talking about
I was going to add one thing to that, Laura.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
That's all right. I was going to add one thing to that. So that's the sort of the Labour facing experience. if you're sort of blue wall like I am, yeah, the risk for places like me is that that the national story is all about the surge in Labour. And actually the fact that the Liberal Democrats are very clearly in second place and are the challenges the Conservatives can get lost because people are watching the news, reading the papers, and they're missing that message. So when you're out and you're talking to voters and you're putting things on leaflets, you have to be overt that we are the alternative. And yes, stick a bar chart on it if that's what it takes.
I think a lot of canvassing as well at the moment, because I think a lot of the time people really need that conversation. And I think now more than anything else, that kind of friendly face and that individual contact when people just feel so let down and so frustrated, that kind of that personal connection that you get by knocking on someone's door and talking to them is particularly important. So I think, certainly if you're in a local party that, doesn't do as much canvassing, maybe relies a bit on delivery, this might be a good time to sort of really try and get out and hit those doorsteps.
And I'm going to throw something in as well. So, because this is I am in a place where we're in general election terms, third place by quite a long way. And it's Labour held, Conservative second. This is a real opportunity to try and target that Conservative vote, because they're probably not it was a tough fight in this constituency last time out between Labour and the Conservatives, and those people who voted Conservative really didn't want a Labour MP. So there's a big chunk of votes there who are going to look at the national scene and go, well, that doesn't represent me, but doesn't want to vote Labour. So there's a real opportunity where you're in third place to pick up a lot of those votes. And I know it's difficult when you're down in third place because you probably means you don't have the resources necessarily. But anything you can do, what leaflets you can put out, what canvassing you can do, that can really help kind of just give us that lift next time out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the other thing, thinking about a general election, if one is called, I suppose the other message as well would be thinking about what you can do to support your local target seats, and your local development seats if you don't live close to a target seat. Obviously, it's very easy for me to say because I am standing in a target seat, so I'm saying please come and help me. But I think we've had a few disappointing elections where we haven't done this, where we have sort of seen polls that are going all over the place and thought, what, I'm going to win from miles back. But I think sort of building up those relationships with those target seats and kind of trusting what people are asking you to do and what people are telling you to do is really important, because I think there's a massive opportunity for the party if there is a general election. I think the Conservatives would fall back a long way. We've seen some polls which sort of see us on massive surges and coming second. I think a more realistic goal is that actually if we can have a kind of very successful general election, potentially triple our seats and the SNP fall back, we could potentially be looking at getting back third party status, which would be huge for the party in terms of the media coverage, and everything that comes with that, the number of questions in the House of Commons, sort of all of this. But it does rely on all of us not losing our heads and sort of going off and campaigning in optimistic sheer south, and meanwhile we're losing in, I don't know, winnable sheer north by 100 votes. So please do listen to what you're being asked to do, and build up those relationships now as well, because actually it is a two-way street. If you're in if you're somewhere where you're not in a winnable area, but you can travel, you might be able to learn things like we do with by-elections, but also you'll be making connections, and hopefully maybe you have a council by-election in your patch down the track. People will come and help you. It is a two-way street, and it should be a two-way street. But I think if a general election is called, let's all stay focused and get the result we deserve this time.
Yeah, and I think we need to be really straight with our members and our helpers about that's what the deal is, and the earlier you can set that out, I think the better. One of the tricky things that happened during the 2019 general election campaign for me in Arundel and South Downs was it becoming obvious that the Lib Dem campaign nationally was not going well, and asking people who really had believed that some of our non-target seats might be on, look, they're not on. please can you go to Guildford and to Lewes and to Eastbourne? And people didn't want to do that because they still believed that, you know, the dream could happen. Yeah. So I think the earlier you can set those expectations about what the real goals are,
crush those dreams,
better.
Alison. Crush everyone's dreams now.
I know, I don't want to be that person.
John's joined us, just joining just as I was just as I was telling people to crush their dreams.
Inspirational stuff here, John.
Inspirational stuff. Sorry, Sam, you were about to.
Well, I think Hannah Kitchen, who's one of the regulars, repeatedly points out that her constituency was a target and it shouldn't have been last time out. But I think so far, in what I've seen of the targeting that we're doing, like, I have not seen a single seat that has been kind of listed as a target seat where I don't hear it go, yeah, I can see why that makes sense. You know, it does seem to be much more sensible. The messages about what are target seats and what we need to be doing there seem really realistic. And so far that you can kind of trust, which has been difficult because they've got the targeting wrong in the past, and rebuilding that trust is really important. So it behoves kind of the top level of the Lib Dems to be really good at it, because you can't break that trust again. But so far it's right. And so, you know, if we then need to pile in whilst we are getting those correct targeting messages and make sure we do hit them.
I have to say, I think the party is in pretty good shape for, you know, a potential general election if it comes. You know, we've seen a lot of work, obviously Ed Davey as leader, but, you know, we've had Mike Dixon on the pod as well, the sort of CEO, who's doing a fantastic job kind of getting HQ sort of into gear. And I think some of us might have seen the news recently about some previous Conservative major donors joining the Lib Dems and supporting us, which is obviously also great news. So I don't know, I'm excited about what this could bring, but I will also be buying a warm coat just in case.
Yes, my 2019 general election yellow beanie has gone a bit bobbly now, and I may have to replace it if things come to a head shortly.
Perhaps we can organise a podcast job lot of yellow beanies for a snap election, if it's called.
It is interesting. I had a job interview with the Lib Dems recently. I didn't get it, but it was really interesting talking to the staff about the way that they were trying to approach things, and them kind of mentioning unprompted the Thornhill review and how they were implementing things, and like things that as a campaigner I was like, oh, I really do wonder if, like, unprompted coming out of the staff and them just going, oh, so we want to work in this way, and me going, that makes real sense, and why weren't we doing that? Now, I was really impressed by what they were saying as we were talking about how they were working.
I think the professionalisation and the making HQ more realistic about what it can and can't achieve, having been burnt so many times, is actually pretty ingrained now. And I think that will upset some people. I think there'll be some campaigner, why aren't we going for X seat? But, you know, we know you target too wide, you don't win anything. That's the problem.
Yeah, so I think I was just looking through the list of things that I made that we should be doing to prepare for a possible general election. The other one I've got is get your leaflets out. If you've got any leaflets that are sitting on your shelves now that don't have a general election imprint on, because why would they? Maybe like go and do that in the next couple of days. Like, you'll never regret having your leaflets delivered. This would be a really good time to do that. I think the other thing I'll be doing is I'll be trying to make my leaflets too specific, because you know what, like a leaflet slamming Prime Minister Liz Truss, if it's going to take you a month to get it out, that might not be the way to go. So yes. I think I'll be slamming in general terms.
I have this very afternoon edited a leaflet and taken out the term Prime Minister Liz Truss and replaced it with MP Andrew Griffith voted, because I thought if it's happened in the past, then it can't be wrong.
So, I obviously I have no idea what you've talked about so far, I think, because I've been stuck in traffic. But it is absolutely remarkable what is going on in terms of this vote tonight. I don't know how much you've talked about the fracking vote, but the fact that Liz Truss herself didn't vote for for what was going to be a 3-line whip. But you know, the real concerning thing about all this, and we can have a level of amusement at just the chaos that's currently happening, but also the government is there to actually govern, and there are serious and scary things happening at the moment that aren't being done properly, and we don't have a functioning government at all. And that is really, really scary. And you guys know from the podcast WhatsApp, local councils are making massive financial decisions that are getting affected by what's going on, that will affect the one that we're planning on doing kind of tomorrow, which is a confidential item. But he's talking about the next 40 years, it will have an effect on our council, and these are the decisions we're having to make. So it is really terrifying what a lack of government will do, and what that does to the financial markets. It wasn't just the budget that screwed the financial markets, it was the fact that they think Britain now has got a risk factor attached to it.
Yeah, the more on risk premium was the phrase
right.
that Paul Krugman came out with. Yeah, I mean I think it was very much a sort of Emperor's New Clothes moment, wasn't it? Where the mini budget almost triggered the markets to notice all of the things that had been going wrong in the UK economy for a very long time, and that's what kind of triggered the crisis. But I think that's a really important point, actually, because I think it does show that it, in terms of how we address it, it's not just a case of walking back the mini budget. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. We also need to be thinking about some of those structural issues that kind of got us in this mess in the first place, including, I mean, things like the sort of levelling up agenda, but also, the obvious one is Brexit. The government is U-turning on everything. Perhaps we can be optimistic and they'll also U-turn on their opposition to rejoining the single market and the customs union.
Yeah, you know what's interesting, though? One of the big things I think they've given us a chance into, and I expect the Lib Dems will be doing some sort of higher-end briefing on this, is about how immigration was clearly a factor in the Brexit vote, which, and for wrong reasons from my point of view, in terms of they were using it as a scapegoat for other things. But the fact that Liz Truss and the government is having to say, actually, we need now more immigration for our economy to work, is a really strong shield we have if we're going for single market entry, customs union entry. And while Labour are terrified of their own shadow in terms of, that the only time Labour have looked out of sorts these last couple of weeks is when Rachel Reeves was caught out on the immigration thing, because she was terrified of saying anything even remotely positive about immigration. We can grab that now, and we should be really immigration's a great thing for this country, not just economically, not just socially, but the fact that we need it. We've got an aging population, and we will, if we want growth, and you want growth and an economy that's thriving, you will need immigration into this country. Now, and we can say that, and we should be saying that, but we've got to be brave enough to do it.
I do think as well, there's going to be a challenge, but also an opportunity for the Lib Dems if the kind of polling leads that we've been seeing for Labour continue. Because I think up to now, we've been sort of like, well, our message is that we need to try and get the Conservatives out, that we're focusing on these blue wall constituencies, which we can win, and sort of almost playing down the differences between us and Labour. Whereas actually, if it starts to look like, Labour are heading for a big majority, then I think at that point we need to start making the case for why we actually want lots of Liberal Democrats in Parliament. Yeah. And it'll be a challenge because the public might see it, see that sort of kicking their local Conservative out as less important if there's going to be a Labour landslide anyway. But actually, if we can make the case for liberalism, then that's a real opportunity actually to win, not only, win a number of seats, because in a lot of these seats, voters do agree with us on a lot of these issues. And I think immigration is a really good example where the electorate is moving in our direction and where Labour is, as you say, absolutely not moving with the electorate. But I think it is a real opportunity to not just win seats, but win seats where people actually agree with them because they're actually in line with our values, which would be extremely exciting.
Mm-hmm. Alison, I'm curious because me, Sam and Laura all have fairly strong Labour parties that we have to deal with. Now, we've talked about the fact that Mid Sussex was put in as a likely Labour win despite them having no councillors. What there is of Labour in your patch, are they energised? Are they doing anything? Have you started to notice any sort of activity? Or is it just non-existent and we just should really ignore electoral calculus?
I'd be inclined to ignore electoral calculus, but I don't want to denigrate the Mid Sussex Labour Party because even this evening they have liked my tweet. And So I do appreciate that.
You've got to be careful.
They won't get selected.
They won't get selected.
Yeah, that's right.
Sorry. Actually, guys, I just realised I think that's a joke from within the WhatsApp that we should probably explain.
So this is the ongoing stuff in Labour selections where liking tweets by opposition, even non-political tweets, seems to be getting candidates in hot water. So I have a personal example up here in Lancashire, but also one that came up very strongly was someone who liked something Caroline Lucas had said, and then he was not allowed even on the shortlist. And whether or not the Starmer purge of the left is also anyone who isn't full on Team Starmer.
I do think that there's a serious point in that, though, which is like, it does show that Labour are not our friends. Like, I think it's very tempting when you're in a seat where there aren't that many, Labour activists to think, oh, yes, we're all on the same team. But the fact is that, like, Labour are tribal even by the standards of politicians, and they are very much not our friends. Starmer has said very clearly that he would not go into coalition with the Liberal Democrats or make any deal with the Liberal Democrats.
Has he said
I'm not sure I believe him.
He said that about the SNP.
He said that about the SNP. He said it about the Lib Dems as well. I mean, I'm not sure I believe him because, if he's, I'm sorry, I just don't believe that if he was, standing there 10 short of a majority and Ed Davey was standing there with 30 MPs, that they wouldn't have a chat. Like, I just don't find that plausible. But, he has said it because they are, it's tribalism. And I think it is really important to remember that we're not just a sort of anti-Tory front. This government needs to go, absolutely needs to go, and sort of kicking them out of office has to be one of our top priorities as a party. But we are actually about fighting for the Liberal Democrats and for liberalism, not just against the Tories.
Yeah, he also said that he was going to support PR when he was campaigning to become leader, and then immediately ditched that when he thought, and it goes back to that tribal thing of he thinks there's a chance of getting a strong Labour government. Well, then I don't need to pretend that I like this option. I can just go along with the one that ends up with me hopefully getting a majority of seats. And it really shows that thing of they don't want us doing well. They don't like us.
I mean, it is so desperately cynical, though, because, I mean, this country, it votes for Conservative governments about 2/3 of the time. And it's almost like Labour's being like, well, as long as we get untrammeled power for that other third of the time, we don't really care what the Tories do the other 2/3 of the time. Whereas actually, if we had a fairer voting system where everybody had to compromise a bit, then, we would probably end up with better government that would be in the interests of the people that they, are claiming to represent. But no, tribalism is more important.
I also think there's a really important thing, not just the fairer voting system, like a second house that could oppose this stuff.
Absolutely.
The House of Lords, despite there being some brilliant people in it, like is just like sitting there like a dummy. I mean, it has no impact whatsoever. All of this chaos and infighting. Has anyone heard, anything out of what it should be? The main kind of holding to account body in our political system.
I think the strong argument that the House of Lords is kind of a neutral body full of academics and stuff gets weaker year on year. I think with obvious politicos from all sides and party donors, the argument that the House of Lords is anyway doesn't need reform is for the birds now.
Yeah. So top podcast recommendation would be the London Grad podcast, if you've not listened to that. And that's I'm gonna have forgotten their names. The Russian who's got who's got a seat in the Lords. There you go. Listen to that, and then you'll weep into sadness about our political system, how it's funded, and just the state of it, really.
So we're gonna win lots of seats. We're gonna re-establish the Lib Dems as the third party in the imminent winter general election, and then we're gonna change the world.
Yeah. And do we all have to pay Alison money if she's right with a prediction that Truss wouldn't make it till Christmas? Because you were the only one on there.
That works for me.
Yeah, either a small campaign donation or a round of leaflets.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Fair enough. So I guess should we end with any more parting thoughts or rounds of predictions?
Oh, I would be really interested right now if I was in North Shropshire or Tiverton and Honiton. I really want to know because when they won, we all said that's going to be really difficult to hold on to. And I wonder what's going to, I think they're the sort, it'd be really interesting to see their campaigning tactics and what's going on and how they're feeling.
I was thinking about a chap I canvassed in Tiverton and Honiton who said, I'm voting for you lot this time, but only because I want Boris gone. And once he's gone, then I'll vote for the Conservatives again. And I'd love to have a conversation with him now and see if he's still back in the Conservative fold or not.
I suppose my prediction is I still don't think there'll be a general election anytime soon. I think as much as it's utter chaos, the Tories will still want to cling to power as best they can. I still think 2024 is my thing. It looks utterly shambles. I think Truss has got... Alison has won me over with her, fantastic future sightseeing. But Truss is dead. Truss is... I genuinely felt sorry for her yesterday. And on a personal level, just like everything... And then you see some of the things that come out of her mouth and it quickly goes away. But Truss will be out by Christmas. There'll be some sort of unity candidate, maybe Jeremy Hunt, and there'll be no election before 2024, and they'll limp along, is my prediction.
Yeah, I think I've got a bimodal prediction in that I think there's going to be either a general election this year, which I think is what we should get. But if it's not this year, I think it'll be late 2024, or even, dare I say it, January 2025.
Yeah, I raised this thing. If they went for January 2025, and so Christmas and New Year gets in the way of campaigning, it seems just the thought of knobheady thing they'll do.
I mean, I think what everybody wants, everybody in this country can unite. What they most want to happen is to have a Liberal Democrat activist knocking on their door on Christmas Day, where they're just sitting down to their turkey. Although, of course, Sam, I mean, you'll remember your local by-election where we basically did have to do that. Do you remember the Oldham East and Saddleworth by-election back in 2011, when everyone got frostbite, and where we basically did have to knock on people's doors on Christmas Day.
Yes. A by-election caused by Labour are not our friends.
Yeah. I think if you were not in the party during the Oldham East and Saddleworth by-election, then I suggest you look up the details of the court case that led to that by-election. And I think I know for a fact that the campaign guidelines for by-elections, there is a note specifically telling people to check that the potential by-election HQ has heating. And that's what happens when you have a giant warehouse with no heating in Lancashire with a by-election in January.
Yeah, absolutely.
When I said we all got frostbite, I think we actually did. So that will be something to look forward to in January 2025. But look on the bright side, it will be even harder if you're Alistair Carmichael or Jamie Stone. So our thoughts are with them.
Is that us done for this episode then?
I think I feel done for now. Maybe we'll come back tomorrow after there's more carnage. Maybe another few ministers resigning. Maybe it'll. Rather than carrying MPs through the voting lobby, maybe they'll launch into actual fighting. I guess,
I don't know. I was trying to think what my prediction was, and I was trying to think, who do I think the next cabinet minister to resign will be, but I can't work it out. I didn't see Braverman going today, so I don't know. We'll have to wait and see.
I mean, again, you've already explained this. I assume Braverman's went because she can't push children into the English Channel or something like that.
Well, we haven't actually discussed her letter, which just is basically calling out Liz Truss for not resigning when everybody can see she's made a complete pig's ear of everything.
I mean, she's basically, her letter is launching her leadership campaign, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, which I think is what suggests that we may have a little way to run, because she's making clear that she's not going to lie down for a quote unquote unity candidate. And if the right of the party doesn't want to be united, then it's going to be hard to find a unity candidate, which I think is why we do have to, where there actually might be a general election. Like if the Tory party does literally fall apart and they can't find anyone who can command the confidence of the House of Commons, then general election is what needs to happen.
Well, folks, it is 10 o'clock on Wednesday. We've all got busy days, but I've got full council tomorrow, believe it. So we will be back potentially on Friday. I have a little bit of time on Friday to maybe get the gang back together and see where this goes in 48 hours. I suppose the last prediction we could do, is Truss going to be in place in 48 hours? Yes or no, Sam?
Yeah.
The fact you're thinking about it shows you what kind of a situation we're in here. Alison?
No, because apparently Brady has got enough letters and he's told her he's got enough letters, but because they can't see, the phrase I heard was, you never enter a yellow box junction on the road until you can see the route out.
Oh, you've been listening to the news agents.
Yes, yeah, that's it. That's where they said it. And they can't see the route out the other side. So maybe if they can find the route out the other side in the tomorrow, maybe maybe Braverman is the route out the other side. No. Sorry, Sam. Sorry, I didn't mean to traumatise you.
If Liz Truss is quoting Peter Mandelson today, what is she going to be quoting tomorrow? We'll wait and see. She's a fighter, not a quitter.
Oh, well.
Despite my late entrance, that will do us for today. Thank you so much, listeners, for coming on and watching and listening to the podcast. Thank you to Sam, Alison and Laura for stepping up for this emergency podcast while I was in the depths of despair with Manchester Airport. So we really do. The only thing that's probably more chaotic and worse than this government is Manchester Airport. But we'll be back with more episodes, probably in the next couple of days, just to find out exactly what's going to happen with this government. But we really appreciate your support. Do follow us on social media as well. We're doing lots of polls to see what you guys think. And very interestingly enough, the last poll we did, it was dead split between whether or not Labour would get a majority of the next election. It was virtually 50-50. So it's really interesting hearing your opinions on stuff. So thank you very much. Have a good night. Stay tuned to the news and we'll be back with another episode very soon.